Hey guys, this is Adûn. This is the first of many upcoming guides I have in the pipeline for the Culling. This one is a guide for the sniper. Its endgame goal is to harness the killing power of the rifle. It's a high risk, high reward playstyle that can suit all types of players as long as they're willing to play to its strengths and minimize its weaknesses. It's a mid to endgame build, which means particularly the early game is going to require finesse to stay alive and achieve your goals, with the mid and especially late game becoming very favorable. Here I'm going to show you in detail how I go about playing this build. Let's take a quick look at some of the pros and cons of the build. For pros, it's mid to end game dominant. It has high body and headshot damage, being 50 and 95 respectively. It has a strong bleed. Once you're equipped, you can handle even multiple enemies at once. It rewards good aim. For cons, it has a weak early game, which means you can be zoned by certain builds which are either centered on snowballing off the early game or are just naturally strong during all phases of the game. You can be disarmed if you kite or position improperly or are just caught unaware, especially by a speedy spear or runs with knives build, or any other build with stealthy of course. To make matters worse, if your rifle is disarmed, it will very likely be used against you, which as you can imagine makes for unhappy times. The funk cost is very high to both call your airdrop and maintain your ammo. It relies on good aim and making every bullet count. Let's move on to the build itself. We have leg day, stealthy, money bags, and the sniper airdrop. There are other variations of this build with different perks or the other rifle airdrop which is called Hunter, but I'll get to that a little bit later in the video. Leg day is an important staple because this build is about constantly being on the move and trying to remain one step ahead of your opponents, sometimes literally so. You're going to be retreating from fights that don't favor you, at least at first, and when looting buildings, you'll be doing so with the knowledge you might have to book it at a moment's notice. Next we have Stealthy, which is a perk that suits us very well because this build is all about not calling attention to yourself. We also use it as an invaluable utility to quickly accumulate funk by moving undetected into places which otherwise might be very bad very quick for you. Additionally, it's very possible to secure early to mid-game kills by sneaking up on people, which can be an enormous boost of funk if done correctly. It should be noted that the only times you should be fighting early game are if you're able to get the alpha strike, preferably a backstab, on your target, or if for some reason you see the target is a very highly probable kill. Keep in mind, however, that good players know how to survive, and for builds with lack of early kill potential such as this one, it very well may not be worth your time to try to seal the deal, so to speak, because you either might attract too many other players in the process, or it might not just be worth the time investment. Lastly, we have money bags, which synergizes with this build excellently due to the incredibly funk-hungry nature of every gun build in the game. For those unaware, gun airdrops are balanced by the fact that they cost by far the most funk to call, which is in addition to another 75 funk cost to either reload your gun or provide yourself with a second clip, which is the maximum of which a gun can hold in the Culling, 2 clips. So with money bags in this build, you're moving swiftly while avoiding detection with the leg day stealthy combo, all while looting and checking buildings and accumulating funk significantly faster than your opponents, which as mentioned, for a build like this is an absolute necessity. There are also a ton of cool tricks you can do with this perk to accumulate or preserve funk, which I will get to during the tips and tricks section. Our airdrop here is Sniper, which gives you a rifle and an explosive mine, aka a claymore. This airdrop is one of the 2 rifle airdrops in the game, the other of which being Hunter, which provides you with a rifle, man tracker, and alarm gun, and is more economical by 10 funk. I prefer the Sniper airdrop mainly because the utility of the man tracker and alarm gun are not necessarily the utility I want for this build, so I prefer not to take up valuable slots with them. However, with this said, the Hunter airdrop definitely has its uses and I'll be getting into them in the build variations section of this guide. For equipment, this build's primary weapon is the rifle, which is going to be the mainstay of the build's mid to late game kill potential. The secondary weapon of the build, which is used for dealing consistent DPS and whittling targets down, as well as simply disguising the fact that you do have a rifle, is a bow, crafted or better. If you eventually acquire a recurve or compound through looting or killing, then all the better, but a crafted bow is still very sufficient. Our third weapon is the blowgun. This has an enormous amount of uses and utility, but its main use in this build is to help set up our kill shot. Once we hit someone with a blow dart, in a few short seconds they'll vomit, which causes them to momentarily stand in place, allowing us just enough time to get off a shot with the rifle. Our fourth slot is a melee weapon, basically being the best of which you can find throughout the game. Since our build is very offensive, weapons like blades and spears work better because they bleed, but really the important thing is to just find a good, preferably high tier melee weapon of any kind and use it well. Our fifth slot, which only applies if we've looted a backpack, is our utility slot. This slot is very much open to not only personal playstyle, but also heavily dependent on the situation. Sometimes you might want to use a man tracker to hunt down players once you have your rifle, or you might want to use a second tier 2 weapon or better for an extra clutch throw, or maybe an orange juice or other stim or medkit you've looted. It just really depends what's going on. Now let's move on to how this build actually plays during each phase of the game, from early to mid to end game. First thing we'll do is craft a spear. We do this by looking around to see if there are rocks and branches in the vicinity of our spawn crate. If so, we'll use 2 rocks to make a knife, and 1 branch and the knife to make a spear. We craft the spear right off the bat because it's a dominant early game melee weapon, but also because our build uses a bow, which requires a spear to craft, so it all synergizes together. Next, we'll determine roughly where we are, and head to the nearest building, picking up whatever rocks or branches we didn't already use. You might ask, what's the point of this? We do this because these items can be used to throw at people if we find ourselves in a duel. They can be used to craft without having to call attention to ourselves by beating on rocks or trees. Remember, the stealthy perk allows us to craft silently, so if we can skip the gathering process, we've essentially made an item from scratch, making no noise whatsoever, which is very important and unique only to the stealthy perk. On the way to the nearest building, we'll loot all funk corpses we come across, as they give us 7 funk each. Here we've entered survival station at 24 minutes remaining, and no one's there yet. We go through the building, and we eventually hear someone open the door. At this point, we need to make the decision if we're going to engage or not. Using stealthy to our advantage, we'll try and go for the first charged attack and see if we can snowball the fight off of it. The first 10 seconds of the fight will be about reading the opponent and his skill level and making the overall decision to commit or not. I've determined that he has a relatively low skill level as he turns his back to me despite seeing I have explosive runs. This means, in all probability, we'll be able to secure the kill with minimal harm incurred to ourselves and in an acceptable time frame, so as not to potentially call too much attention from surrounding contestants. After the fight is done, I assess my gains, which are 41 funk, 7 from coming near him, 7 for hitting him, and 27 for the kill, and my losses, which are only 17 HP. I pop the satchel I looted from him for a much needed 4th inventory slot, heal up, and head southeast to the pump house, with the intention of then heading south to the airport, west to Cocast Radio, north to Swamp House, and north again to Coco Labs. Knowing these kinds of map rotations are useful in the game in general, but particularly in a money-bagged, high-funk airdrop build, where we need to capitalize on every second of the early game in order to even be a factor in the late game. I clean out Pump House, which turns out to also be untouched, and I head to the airport. At this point, I'm in a good position. I have 111 funk at 440 into the game. I'm stimmed and in possession of a tier 2 axe with an extra stim ready to go. Airport's building turns out to be fully looted, so I check at the back of its landing strip for a crate and potential funk corpses, which are often there. I do find a crate with a javelin in it. I recycle my tier 2 axe because I have a tier 2 spear now, which I personally prefer over the axe for this build. Applying some more basic math, I decide to chuck the explosive runs, which would bring me to 180 funk, just enough to call the airdrop, which is 175, and turn my crafted spear into a bow, which is the remaining 5. As we enter into the mid-game, I take a calculated risk by calling in my airdrop with only a crafted bow and a javelin to defend myself. The reason I make this call is because at 6.5 minutes into the match, it's possible I could be attacked by someone who outgears me, but it's also quite unlikely because of 2 factors. Number 1, the airport was fully looted when I arrived, so whoever spawned nearby is already long gone. And number 2, it's still relatively early in the game. I shoot down my airdrop at a medium distance, though it's actually possible to shoot it down further back. The reason I didn't is because I didn't want to waste my last few arrows in case I were to miss and then be attacked. Now with the rifle in hand, I choose to recycle the claymore which came with it. I do this because unless it's late in the game, the 27 funk and freed up inventory slot it provides is more valuable to me than potentially blowing someone up with it, which is actually improbable so early anyway, as I need to keep moving and cannot afford to camp. If it were late game, especially if I had a backpack, I would very likely keep it and trap someone near the center strategically. However, again, that just depends on reading the situation. After replenishing my bow, I head west to Cocast Radio as originally planned. I gain 7 funk for just walking in the door and find an unlooted hammer which becomes another 12. At this point I have more than enough to transition into my late game build, which includes the blowgun. Generally speaking, you want to make the blowgun almost right after you have your rifle because of the kill combo it's capable of, which I described earlier in the video. I continue on my looting path, eventually cleaning out Swamp House and fully filling up the blowgun at a gas pylon, getting ready for the remaining fights in the match, now likely against properly equipped players. As the endgame begins, our primary objective should be to finish our build, equipping ourselves to the best of our ability for the final confrontation. In this match, I already have my full build ready, other than a second clip for my rifle. In order to find this, I finish off my original roaming path by venturing to Coco Labs, seeing if I can either ambush someone who might be there, as I'm more than capable of fighting now, or to find an explosive canister, which is how you reload all guns in this game. Surprisingly enough, it turns out it wasn't looted or fully looted, so I do a cursory check, but considering I literally no longer have any use for funk, I don't spend too much time here, especially because phase 1 map closure is about to begin, which happens at 10 minutes remaining. I do find an explosive canister, and now I am completely full build and ready to even fight multiple opponents at once. This build is arguably one of the strongest max range builds in the game, and we've survived long enough to get to this point, so now all that's left is just to have some fun. On my way to the center arena, I see someone calling in an airdrop, which I attempt to take out of the sky with my crafted bow, but it's moving too fast for me to do so. Instead, I do the next best thing, which is to follow it to the source. I trek it all the way to the pad, where I find the unsuspecting Call E, who is not even aware of my presence due to the stealthy perk. I open up on him with archery for two reasons. Firstly, I'm saving my bullets for the true end of the game. And secondly, I haven't fired a single shot yet this match with the rifle, so no one is even aware of the fact that I have a rifle, and that element of surprise can itself be a weapon. Keep in mind, this decision is also a matter of personal playstyle. Some players might prefer to secure an easy kill with the rifle while alerting the remaining survivors who will prepare accordingly. Personally, I prefer the more subtle approach, but either can work. We proceed to have a pretty one-sided fight, with him merely struggling to stay alive, and despite even managing to shake me for a few seconds because he himself has stealthy, I ultimately catch sight of him and seal the deal. Again, only with archery, because I'm still not trying to advertise to my final opponent that I have a rifle, but more importantly, because I was never even remotely in any danger of losing the fight, which perhaps would have made it a necessity to use the rifle. I fully replenish my bow, and now I'm ready for the final 1v1. I pop my stamina shot with the knowledge the next 2 minutes will be more than enough to decide the victor. He bum rushes me with a T4 axe, trying to disarm me, but I managed to get a blow dart off before he could do so. I notice that he has no movement stim, so I proceed to jump kite his melee push, finally drawing the rifle because it's hungry as hell and has been waiting all game for this. And I get one low shot on him, followed by the vomiting from the blowgun, which I know is going to happen any moment, and when it does, I follow up with another shot while still airborne to finish him off. I still had a bow with 12 arrows, a blowgun with 6 darts, and a rifle with 6 shots. With that amount of firepower, if there were 2 or 3 other guys left, depending on how things played out, I could have even conceivably killed them all as well. Let's get into build variations. This is our classic build. However, there are other perks which can work here, albeit a bit differently, and of course a whole other rifle airdrop, being Hunter. You could for instance substitute any 3 of the perks for Backpacker. Backpacker ensures you have maximum slots the entire game, and as a result, your endgame inventory has maximum options. It also saves you the hassle of making a satchel early on, and it makes looting that much easier. Another option is Load Dropper. This perk allows you to call your airdrop with practically nothing on you, because you won't have to defend it since it arrives instantly. This is a perk for ensuring that you do successfully get your rifle and gives you the option of being able to call it later in the game closer to the center arena without as much danger. The Hunter airdrop is interesting because it costs 10 less funk, it allows you to track players down and ping them with the alarm gun so that they become an obnoxious target to everyone for a few minutes. This airdrop has more utility overall, and if used, I would combine it with the Backpacker due to how it fills up your inventory slots. You could for instance use an equipment loadout here of rifle, alarm gun, blowgun, man tracker, and melee weapon. One thing to keep in mind is that every perk and airdrop in the game has its uses and considerations. If you for instance substitute stealthy with Backpacker, you'll need to crouch a lot more and your crafting will be as loud as everyone else's. Likewise, if you drop leg day, you'll have a harder time kiting and will be an easier target to hunt down. If you drop money bags, you lose that funk generating ability, which means you'll have to call your drop a little later in the game, but if substituted for instance with Load Dropper, that's not really a big concern. The important thing is to try out all these different options and see what suits you the best. There are a lot of things you can keep in mind when playing this build. For instance, with Stealthy, while the perk conceals your footsteps, it does not conceal your weapon sounds, so if planning to ambush someone, swap to your weapon of choice before you get an earshot of them. The rifle iron sight somewhat blocks your view of the target, so try leading them or centering it on them and looking carefully for which direction they're about to move, and very carefully move with them before firing. When reloading your gun or making a second clip, make sure no one sees you, as they can blow up the explosive barrel you're using to reload, and you'll take 25 damage plus bleed and cripple. When you need to heal, try to use bandages, because with money bags, you only spend 1 net funk to heal 25 HP, due to the fact when you use a stim or bandage, you get 2 funk back, with money bags increasing that to 4, and the bandage only costing 5 to begin with. Watch very carefully for your opponent's movement speed. If you see he's stimmed with explosive runs, and is on your back with a spear for instance, it's possible he already has a 20% movement speed build on top of the stim, so do not try to jump cut him directly, but instead stagger him first, then keep moving or go for a shot. Always take a mental note of explosive barrels as you see them in the early to mid game. That way, when you're ready to reload or make a second clip, you already know exactly where to go. Recycle rocks and branches if you have nothing better for 3 funk each, but only if you really do need the funk, as the time investment is somewhat subpar. Realize that if you did get zoned by early game builds which you were unable to keep up with, or you just had a bad start for whatever the reason, it may be best not to attempt an airdrop at all, because if you get ambushed and are already weak, the game is over. Consider instead hitting up blue crates you come across and utilizing to the best of your ability the powerful items they hold. While this is not ideal, you at least give yourself a real fighting chance without an airdrop. After all, when all you got are lemons, you best make lemonade, especially in the Culling. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I hope you found this guide helpful. I have many more in the works, so feel free to subscribe for future content, and if you have any questions, requests, or feedback, leave them in the comments section below, and I'll be more than happy to address them all. Till next time.